Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today I am joined by Brett Cain. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Hello. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks for joining us. You know, we always like to talk with writers. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, what we should know in terms of your biographical information.
You know, that's always the hardest question to answer on the spot. But it's funny because it seems that it's human nature for people to be comfortable talking about themselves until they're asked to. But the most important thing to know about me is that I really do love everyone. That's what I'm well known for. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a writer. I've had such a wide variety of professional and extracurricular activities and career paths. But really, I like to tell stories, and I never thought that I would be a writer when I was a kid. I loved to draw, and I wanted to be an illustrator. And then I spent probably my entire high school career was just me watching the behind the scenes of the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy by Peter Jackson.
Of course.
And I was just enamored with that, and I'd make home movies, and I wanted to be a director, and I thought I'd go to film school and all that. And then after I graduated high school and I served as a missionary for 2 years and came home, and I was like, you know what, film school probably isn't for me because it wasn't as cut and dry as I thought it would be. And then I just decided to start telling stories, and I thought, you know, how hard can it be to write? I've read a couple books. It doesn't seem like it'd be hard to do. And
good place to start.
And yeah, it's brought me here, and it's really eye-opening because it's certainly not easy. I think writing is pretty simple, but there's so much of myself that I put into my writing, and I can see at points when I'm writing fiction if it's also paralleling what I'm journaling or what's going on or what I'm thinking about that day. And I think that's a good thing. And I like to cook as well. But, you know, no matter how much work and love and preparation goes into a meal, it's gone within, you know, a night or the next day if there's leftovers. But what we write is potentially forever.
Absolutely. I have found over the last year or so a great overlap between writing and cooking, people that like the two of those things. You know, not to go too far down a tangent on that, but what about a cookbook? Maybe you got enough recipes to throw something together.
You know, that's actually, you know, I never ever thought about that parallel until you said that. Yeah, I could see myself doing a cookbook. I really like cookbooks. It seems like with the internet and YouTube and things like that, cookbooks are kind of anachronistic. But I love a good cookbook if it's produced right, you know, and they can be really aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, I've got a ton of recipes, and my wife's an even better cook than me. So yeah, I could see a Cain family cookbook in the future. I never thought about that. Thank you. I'll have to give all credit to you.
Well, you don't have to, because it won't be my group of recipes. But at the same time, yeah, it's something that comes up pretty often when I have writers on. And in fact, I had a couple, they're married, and they had put out a cookbook last year. The wife is a nutritionist and the husband is an architect, but they share this love of cooking and then got into gardening, which I also like to do. yeah, so food, being able to follow a program, yeah, and as a script in a way, they do a little bit of filming of their meals and also photography of it, stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap between the processes and maybe in a architectural term.
Yeah, I never considered that, but now it seems so obvious. Yesterday, my coworker asked me if I was creative, and I was and I was kind of taken aback by that. I'm like, you know me very well. You know I like to draw and write, uh, and I did a lot of theater in high school and college, and so I was like, yeah, I'm creative, and then she kind of realized that it was kind of an obvious question. But the reason she asked me is I have a photographic memory as well, and she was wondering like what that is like, because to her, having a memory like that seemed far more on the left brain than right brain, and that was kind of melded. And it was funny because we were trying to remember a name of a client that we'd met months and months ago, and I remembered the husband's name and their last name and their son's name, and I couldn't remember the wife's name. And it took me a little while, and I was thinking, and then I came up with it and said, oh yeah, that's her name. And my coworker's like, wow, you had to go through like your own library and just imagining what that's like in being in the mind. And I think it's similar to, any creative person when it comes to gardening or cooking. You have this idea, and the cool thing about writing and cooking and every creative pursuit is it's so unique. And even if you follow a recipe to a T, there could be some different variations, and what kind of, if it's an electric or gas stove, if, what altitude you're at, if you didn't
Absolutely.
have this particular ingredient, right? Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah,
this is great. This is great stuff, because I see the analogy between what you're saying and what musicians would call improvisation, or even perhaps if you're on stage acting, you might take a little bit of divergence into that way and kind of mix things up, or even just the timing of how you would perform a line or a solo or anything like that. Those things they all have these lines to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny too, because I was just thinking, we use the term like creative license, and I was just imagining what that would look like. Everyone jokes about the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV. And I was like, what would the creative DMV look like, if people standing in line and get their picture taken to get a license to take some creative liberty?
Go faster.
I actually had a question for you.
Okay.
I saw your video episode of How I Remember You, and that was really cool. Was that produced with AI, that video, or how did you make that?
Yeah, absolutely. So
okay.
The workflow on that was, I had written a short story about 2 years ago that was, incredibly short, maybe 150 words or something. And I entered this contest for an AI short film, a competition, right? And I was looking around. I had started working on another project using that, the short documentary about the Chicago 1893 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition. But their rules were that you needed to have a couple other things. So then I said, okay, well, I need to have this fallback plan. So I started generating the images for that using Stable Diffusion, if you're familiar, and then put those through a program called Pika, which is a motion generating artificial intelligence program, and then kind of stitch those things together and do all of the, I did the score, I write the music for that, and then do all the sound effects and stuff. I don't produce all the sound effects. Some I do, but a lot of them are available. So I kind of use that kind of stuff to build out the soundscape and create the experience. I appreciate you watching it though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the music was great too. So that's cool to know that you did that.
Yeah, spent a lot of time with music, performing and writing pretty heavily for like 15 years, I would say. So I don't do a lot of that anymore, but the skill is still there. So when I need it, I can kind of jump back into it. And that was the first time I had more legitimately scored something as opposed to writing the music and then just kind of situating it in. So I want to do more of that. I don't know if I'll do more animated shorts. Maybe we'll see. But I do have this project that's about national parks. So for that series of videos that will come out with volume 3, I want to try and more traditionally score those, which was interesting to me. And I'm compelled to keep kind of going down that road. Are you a musician in any capacity?
Oh my goodness, I wish, I can pluck out a little tune on the guitar. My mom is an incredible guitarist, and my wife is really accomplished on the piano, and my daughter, she's 8, and she's never had any formal lessons, but she just has such an ear for music, for piano. She just started viola lessons, but on the piano she can hear a song and then she can figure it out on the piano. But me, I feel like I missed that train when I was in like 4th or 5th grade. We had a music expo at my elementary school, and I loved the violin. I loved the violin, and I picked up a violin and tried it, and this the music director snatched it out of my hands and told me never to touch another instrument again.
Brutal.
And that it was horrible. And I unfortunately I let that inhibit me. I can play guitar a little bit, but and I don't think you're ever too old, so I would like to learn some more, but no, I'm not much of a musician.
So for me, that's kind of where writing started as a songwriter, creating lyrics for material with bands that I was in, or even kind of rewriting lyrics for cover songs that I was playing to make them more personal for me, Where did your writing start?
Oh man, that's a good question. I still have these little storybooks that I wrote when I was, in 2nd grade, and we would write and then illustrate these books, and then our teacher would bind them and type out what we had scrawled. And I loved to draw. My mom saved all of these, and I this is like 1996, and I was illustrating like Godzilla versus King Kong, or like these basketball playing dinosaurs, and just things like that. And so I always liked to write, and I still have some of my notebooks from 6th grade, because we would have to keep a journal in 6th grade. We school would have us journal for a period of, that was one of our classes, was just journaling. And I kept that, and I said, okay, I want to start telling these stories. And I had always loved to read, and my parents read to me from a young age, and I just kept writing, and took creative writing in high school and college, but I never. It was mostly poetry or short stories, and then I decided to try my hand at novel writing just shortly before I got married, and I had an idea for a novel. And my friend, who is an accomplished writer as well, he told me, he's like, hey, I'm going to give you 6 months to make some headway on this, or else I'm stealing your idea. I said, okay, I better get cranking. And I was really fortunate. I know a lot of great writers out there don't get picked up by a traditional publisher. And certainly the stigma of independent or self-publishing is completely gone now. I mean, in fact, I think it's a lot of times the better writers out there are completely independent, just the way some of the big publishing houses are going. But back in 2016, when I first made contact with who was my publisher for my first two books, they accepted it right away, and that doesn't really happen for most people on the first try. So that was really fortunate for me, and then I knew I want to write the kind of stories that I would like to read, and it's kind of a synthesis of all the stories that I've read and still read. So that's what brought me here.
That's fantastic. I want to ask two questions about your writing. First one is about the craft. How do you work through a story or work through a manuscript in general? What's that process like?
I love that question, and for me, it's kind of unstructured. I know a lot of people will recommend an organized or more formulaic approach, and I think that's really useful for some people. But for me, I kind of just imagine that a train is coming, and I have all the tracks in my hands, and I have to lay the tracks. And wherever they end up going, so be it, as long as the train doesn't derail. And as soon as I get the story out of my head and onto the page, then I can rearrange it. And it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. But I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the different structure pieces in my mind. I'll play out certain scenes and kind of think, oh, I like that. But I have to do a combination of handwriting. So I'll write in a notebook some scenes and then typing it. And I actually really love that approach, because I think writing things out by hand, you really get a sense of effort and results, and you can see the immediate fruits of your labor. On a word processor, it's so easy to get discouraged when you have to delete an entire section and then you see your page count drop and your word count drop. It's like, oh man, all that work is gone. But if it's written out, it's like, okay, I've got some stuff to work with. So that's kind of my approach to it. I typically will only do one draft, and that's worked well for me. Not to say I won't make edits and go back, but I have really good test readers. My father especially, and with my previous publisher, I had a great editor who gave me some good insight, and I think that's the best thing, because it's such an individual activity, but we're really doing it for not only ourselves but for all of our potential readers, which are limitless potentially, and so I like to get some real-time feedback, at least with certain scenes or aspects. And I think that approach can vary genre to genre. I'm a bit more fortunate in that I have an easier approach, because I write about the world that we live in, and so I don't have to come up with complicated magic systems or new worlds or things that braver writers than I have to deal with. But that's typically my approach, is to write things out by hand and then type it.
Definitely. I kind of go back and forth. So I'll write some things physically and then gather that stuff up, put it into digital, maybe build that out, structure it some more, print that out, and then kind of work again by hand. And I'll do a few cycles of that and let it build up, whether that's using an outline or, not really. I think either way is fine. I do like having it physically in front of me instead of just staring at a screen, which when you have it printed out, I think that tactile sense of what you have presently or at that point in time, and to be able to kind of jump in non-linearly and make notes or make additions or have things that kind of spark you at that point in time is very different than when you're working on a digital platform. That's just my opinion.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with your publisher and, maybe how it started and how it's gone where it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started out really positive. I was just so grateful to have my name in print, and I would have signed anything that they stuck in front of me. It wasn't a huge publisher. Pretty well known in the Intermountain West area. I live on the West Coast, but the biggest difference for me was that it really set the tone for my character. So I write mystery novels, and in my first submission, I had my protagonist kill the bad guy, and this particular publisher didn't want any gratuitous violence, and so I changed that. I said, okay, maybe he's a bit like Batman. That's his rule. Like, he doesn't want to kill people, and so that kind of made it a little bit more challenging, just in terms of, I love fighting, and I've competed in a lot of different combat sports. And it's like, okay, if you're fighting someone, incapacitating them and making it to the point where they're no longer a threat without killing them is typically harder, because if you kill a bad guy, then you don't have to worry about him. But if you hit him over the head or tie him up, there's the chance that they can escape or regain consciousness or something like that. So it presented kind of a unique challenge for my character. So that was one of the big things. I made a post about this not too long ago, but I really took for granted all the things that they did behind the scenes, and I appreciated the promotions that they did. They came up with the cover design. They changed the title from my initial from my first novel's title, and in fact, I think that was an improvement, and that's kind of set the tone for my subsequent novel titles. And then just having the editor, and it took so much off my plate just in terms of formatting. And so had a bit of a disagreement after my second book, and we ended up going our separate ways. It was a little more acrimonious than I would have liked. I still have some great contacts over there, and I bear them no ill will. It was just unfortunate that the particular climate that we live in is so set on walking on eggshells, and you have to fall within a certain mold, and if you color outside the lines or deviate in any regard, then you're blacklisted, essentially. So say goodbye to my previous publisher, bought my rights back because they owned my character. Got my remaining inventory back, and then I was given the opportunity to have Nauvoo Supply Company and their publishing wing, 40 Degrees North, picked up my stories and is now publishing them. So it's definitely been a journey, but there's a lot more work that I have to do on my side in terms of formatting, editing, coming up with a cover design, all these things that I kind of took for granted. So it was definitely eye-opening, and now I see how much harder work it is to be an independent and self-publisher without having a bunch of resources behind you like you would with a typical publisher.
Completely understandable as someone who does the entire circuit of self-publishing in terms of the writing, the layout, audio, reading, production, the whole
absolutely.
bit. So let's kind of dive into the books that you have out. So currently you have a trilogy, right?
Yes.
And they are featuring Frank Sawyer.
Yes, that's correct. Frank Sawyer, and he goes by Sawyer, and he is a young man, a returned missionary, and he seems to have a knack for winding up in precarious situations through no fault of his own, but he takes it upon himself to try and solve problems for people using his wit and his fists. So kind of a modern day Western, typically rides into town and then solves a problem and then rides out. And I wanted a character, kind of like John D. McDonald's Travis McGee or Lee Child's Jack Reacher. But I want him a little bit younger and then a little bit more refined. So, he's not, there's no, immorality. There's no sex in my books. There's no profanity. Not that those things are in and of themselves bad, but just for my particular books, I chose not to put that in, and just wanted to make him, if these, action heroes, what would it be like if they were a church going man? And I was like, okay, so that's kind of how I based it off of.
Sure. So things started with Whiteout.
Correct.
And then progressed to Out by Night.
Yes.
Now, I don't need you to necessarily give up the whole ghost on these things. We want people to read them, obviously, but maybe give us a little bit of arc, from a 30,000 foot view so we can get to where he is with your newest release.
Absolutely. I really like the way you asked that. So Whiteout starts just after he's returned home from 2 years as a missionary. And as a missionary, he was overseas. He hadn't been able to drive a car or go on a date or even watch a movie in 2 years. And so he just wants to take full advantage of the United States of America, a country that he deeply missed and now values so much. So the first book sees him in the middle of winter in a small town in Montana, and he's got to solve a problem. And after he does that, with some alacrity, he leaves town, and that brings us to Out by Night. And he's now in Southern California, and he's looking up an old mission buddy, and he ends up stumbling upon a conspiracy that's led to a number of missing children. And that takes him from California to Mexico and back. And he has some good adventures there. And then my latest installment is Without a Shadow. And this one really sees Sawyer in kind of a new world, and that he's as close as he ever has been to the sort of mysticism that has started to crop up in Out by Night in the form of revelatory dreams, impressions. You'd say it's just instinct or God or any other sort of influence. And this book actually really illustrates why he needs to move on and what happens when he doesn't. And I'm really happy with this particular story, just because it's probably Sawyer's biggest challenge to date. And this story actually gave me the opportunity to incorporate a lot of the things that I love in a story, because it seems like so many of the stories we read, and not that it's a bad thing, but take place in a busy city, or there's, cars and cell phones and, police that can be called, or lights that can be turned on, or cars that can be driven. And this is strictly in the wilderness, and there are no phone lines. There is no electricity. There's no backup. And that's what we see in Without a Shadow.
Very interesting. So could people be dropped into the most recent book without having read the other pieces, or is it basically, more linear in its episodic nature to where you really need that earlier material to understand what's happening in the new setting?
That's a really good question. Now, when I started out, I wanted each installment to be a standalone, so you could pick up any book at any time and just get right into the story. I think you potentially could start with Without a Shadow, but I had mostly female complaints about how the first book ends. And so I changed it with the second one last minute to actually have Sawyer stay in one place. And so he's still in the same place from the second book to the third. And so the second book in particular is important to the third. But between the first and the second, Whiteout and Out by Night, you read those out of order. And from now on, they'll be more standalone and episodic. But in this case, it's really important to read Out by Night before Without a Shadow, just to get the full experience. Now, I've read book series and read later in the series, and then come back and read the previous installment and said, oh, that's kind of cool, and then revisited it. So it just depends, I think. I don't think anyone is going to miss out on the adventure if they start Without a Shadow. But you can see the whole picture if you read Out by Night before.
Gotcha. Yeah, so there's a continuation happening there. Where are you going next? I know you just released this one, but the thinking is here that you've got a character, you've been developing it for a number of years. Assuming, that he lives, are we going to be able to expect more from Sawyer in the future?
That is a great question. And the answer is yes. We'll definitely see more of Frank Sawyer. I think this ending is going to be hard for some people because it really is. Yeah, and it's not even the way like that I would want to end it, but it's the way it had to end. I feel like creating these characters, they're telling me the story. They're doing what has to be done, regardless of what I want for them. So we will see Sawyer move on, and we're going to see him in new environs, new friends, new enemies, and I'm excited about this next one. So each book has kind of had an overarching theme, or I should say motif. So in Whiteout, it's the snow. He's constantly dealing with snow. In Out by Night, it's rain, and he's in a very rainy place. In Without a Shadow, he's dealing a lot with darkness, actual darkness and spiritual darkness as well. And in the fourth book, we'll see him dealing with a lot of heat. So I won't give away where in America is Frank Sawyer, but he'll be in some place quite toasty.
I like the thematic nature that you are exploring with it. That's very cool. Are you writing other material, or are you basically, investing hard into Sawyer and seeing how far you can go with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've played around with a couple different things. I've submitted a couple short stories to the Passage Prize, for example. One that I was particularly pleased with was a short story that I've since published on Substack that was a sort of different version of Medusa, and really this this character named Athos who endeavors to find Medusa. And I was happy with that short story. I do have plans to branch out eventually. I've got a lot of ideas percolating, but I really want to give Sawyer his due, and I'd like to get a pretty good lineup of Sawyer stories before I really delve into anything else. And just because I think my own resources are limited, and it usually takes me about a year to get a Sawyer story in good shape. And so if I'm writing a Sawyer story every other year, if I'm doing a different project, I just don't think I'm giving him his due. So I'll definitely have some more Sawyer stories. I've got a lot of different ideas. And the cool thing about him is he's a character. He can go anywhere. He can do anything. And it's not like he has to resolve a bunch of things before he can, he doesn't have to put in 2 weeks notice. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have, a wife or children. He doesn't have, a mortgage. He doesn't have a car payment. He doesn't have anything tying him down. And so that's a fun character that I'd like to explore, at least for a little while longer.
Sure. He becomes a vehicle for you to be able to insert all these different types of stories that you might imagine or might kind of use other settings and other characters for, but you don't necessarily need to do that. You can just keep turning it back over to Sawyer.
Exactly.
I like it. I see you have some audiobooks. Did you do the readings or did someone else do the readings?
A great question. So I was fortunate enough to have a really great voice actor, Jason Tatum. He read the first two, and he was hired by my previous publisher. And I'm trying to figure out the mechanics to do an audio version for Without a Shadow. I've got some great friends that I think would read it for me. I've also been getting a lot of encouragement to do the reading myself, and I think I might do that. I've always appreciated when authors have read their own work, and I think that they're just able to get the right intonation and inflection because they know exactly what they were trying to say and how they were trying to say it, even more than a particularly good, even a great voice actor can do. So I think I'll end up doing it myself.
I think you should. I would add my endorsement to that list. I think that when I listen to audiobooks and I hear the author reading them, for the most part, I think they're very good. There's a few times when maybe somebody's not necessarily comfortable on the microphone, but in general, I would say it is very good. But then there are some other times, there's a series of Dune audiobooks that are multi-voiced, at least for the few that I've heard. And that production is very good. They add in a little bit of music and some sound effects here and there, and it really kind of brings that to life because, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it's something that I'm familiar with kind of growing up. And now we're seeing these turned into the new set of movies. So more and more people are familiar with them, but to hear it in audio form, multi-voice that way, I think that is, an exceptional example. Doesn't always need to be done in that kind of manner, but getting back to the author reading the material, 100%. They're just more familiar with it. And even if you get a great reader, they are not necessarily invested into some of the nuance of the lines and the arcs the way that the author would be.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of my thought process. And I love a good audiobook, and I like when there are, books that are so well established that have different readers, and you can kind of, pick and choose. It's like, oh, I really like the way this author reads it and not this one, or this actor reads it.
Yeah.
So no, that's really cool. I didn't realize that there was a multi-voice production of some of the Dune books. That's cool. Yeah, I like that idea with some sound effects and some music, and I think that's pretty cool. Brian Jakes, when I was a kid, he wrote the Redwall series, and they've made audiobooks, and they have a full cast, and they have music and everything. So those are really well done.
That's the direction that I'm trying to go with the fiction that I'm doing, because, I don't think it's strong enough for me to just read on its own. So I kind of build it out into a little bit more of a soundscape. And, they're short. So in that way, giving a little bit more depth and a little bit more atmosphere, I think, hopefully makes it a little bit richer for the listener. The stuff I'm working on, I don't have a novel in me at this point. Maybe in the future I will, but for now, just kind of trying to stretch out into short story fiction is enough of an exercise for me. It's a lot of work for me to produce in general. But back to what you're doing, are there other things that we haven't addressed, or things that we should know about that you want people to hear?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is such an amazing podcast. I'm so honored to be here. I do have my own podcast as well, Ironside, the Ironside podcast, Ironside one word, and had a lot of our mutual friends on there as well, and we talk about everything from fighting and fatherhood to writing and weightlifting. And so that's been a lot of fun, and just having these kinds of conversations are so valuable, and it's fun to listen to other people. I had a creative writing exercise in college that my teacher had us do, and it was to just go somewhere, whether it was a train station or a restaurant or a gymnasium or just any public place, and just sit there and write down the conversation. And obviously you wouldn't know the speakers' names, but just giving them a letter or a nickname, and to bring that back. And it was kind of fun. I felt bad eavesdropping, but I wrote mine down from a restaurant, and we ended up voting on the best conversation that was overheard, and mine won. And it wasn't anything that I had written or come up with. It was just what these people had said that I had recorded. And so it was it kind of reminds me of this, that you and I get to have a conversation, and people that we like to listen to, or people that we admire, have these conversations, and we get to listen in. And I think it's a really interesting phenomenon, and how popular podcasts have becoming. But that's my other pursuit.
Excellent. Love it. I've been podcasting on and off for a long time. I actually started about 10 years ago. None of that stuff's available, but anymore, but kind of got back into it as a result of hosting group chats, which I was broadcasting on Twitter, and then decided to make some of that material available after the fact. And then as I was kind of just allowing that to exist, stopped doing the group chats, but then, found myself wanting to have conversations, more intimate conversations, interview style, like this, with people that I know that are releasing projects or promoting work and things like that. And, find it to be, educational, but also a good opportunity to help put some eyeballs on what people are doing.
Absolutely. And you're doing such a good job at it too.
Well, hey, Brett, thanks for taking the time to talk with me. I do appreciate you this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes. And to anyone listening, please pick up a copy of Out by Night and Whiteout, and definitely Without a Shadow. You can find them on Amazon, or if you'd like a signed copy, you can go through Nauvoo Supply Company, and you'll get a personally autographed copy from me.